Hi, welcome to Eye Openers. I'm your host, Brittany Drozd, and each week I bring you insightful conversations with entrepreneurs that will help you make more money, become a strong leader, and build a business culture that you're proud of. Grab your coffee and let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to Eye Openers. Thank you guys for joining us today as I have a conversation with Elizabeth O'Neill. Thanks for joining us, Elizabeth.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we are going to talk about some of my favorite things, organizational culture and coaching. And what does it look like to actually build a culture around coaching? But before we jump into any big business ideas or concepts, we have to talk about what creates the most eye opening moments for me. And that for me is caffeine. I love my coffee. If you have been watching the show at all, you know that I definitely attribute a lot of my insights into a lovely cup of coffee in the morning. But Elizabeth, what about you? What are you drinking?
Right now, I am drinking. So I'm on the East Coast. So I've already had my coffee. I'm past that. And now I'm on to green tea. And for me, I think in the morning, my routine is sort of getting outside and
Yes.
walking in the fresh air. That's what really kind of gets me going with some creative ideas.
I love that. Do you have like a dog you have to walk in the morning? Is that what brings you outside or?
I only have 2 dogs, and neither one of them come on my walk because they're really high maintenance, and it becomes more about them and where they wanna go as opposed to me having time to myself and really kinda just getting grounded for the day. So, that's my boundary, that's my time for myself.
I love that idea. I'm a big follower of Andrew Huberman and his like neuroscience, and he talks about the importance of getting outside for at least 5 to 10 minutes and getting that morning light and really being able to set your circadian rhythm and improving your sleep, but really also your alertness by getting that morning light into your eyes. So that's like a really great way to actually increase your alertness or your openness to having insights is really just by doing something natural like that instead of just drinking coffee. So, see, we're well rounded here. It's not just about the caffeine or the tea. I've had people even bring Diet Coke before, but it's whatever works for you to kind of get your mind activated, keep you present, focused in order to receive those insights or just have the awareness around it. Well, thank you so much for exploring that and sharing the idea that it doesn't need to be a beverage. And there's lots of things we can do to open our minds up. But it is not just about the substances or the walk or whatever. There's other reasons why people should be here with us today and listening to the insights you're going to bring to this conversation. So, I want to introduce you formally to the listeners. Elizabeth is an executive coach and an expert in helping founders and their teams get aligned for growth. With more than 2 decades of experience guiding leaders and teams, she helps founders get back in control of their time, their team, and their energy so that their companies can scale more quickly and profitably. She holds her BA in psychology from the University of Chicago and an MSW, which is a master's in social work from Columbia, and is an IPEC certified coach. You can follow her on LinkedIn for advice on entrepreneurship, high stakes conversations, and building healthy companies. So, I actually had the luxury of being introduced to Elizabeth by a mutual friend. And one thing that I don't even know if she realized we have in common, but is this shared background of holding an MSW degree. And I think it's a really, really rare thing to find somebody in the business space who has that kind of training. And, I'm not sure if that's why we click the way that we do, but I'm certain it has something to do with it. I know for me, the training really, when I came away with that master's degree, I thought, wow, this is like something every human should have to study because it was really just the study of people and relationships and how we come together and what understanding the dynamics and the motivations and the narratives people bring to relationships and how do we communicate knowing all those things are there and how do we really just relate, right, in this shared human experience? So I know that's the impact it had on me. How about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think and it's kind of interesting now that I'm at the place that I'm at. I had always thought that I was going to be a therapist, and then after coming out of grad school, I went right into the business world, and that was cool because it was just taking all of that kind of that lens of individual psychology and applying it to people and teams, like teams and leaders. And then 4.5 years ago, when I pivoted and started my practice working with fast growth companies, I paused a little bit and was like, how did I get here? Like, how did I go from that to that? And now I'm doing this. And it actually all dovetails really nicely together because you can put any sort of system and process in place that you want in a company to help them run better and perform better. But if and, you and I both work with teams and companies that are experiencing a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. In fact, I
Mhm.
was just talking with somebody earlier today, a founder, and I was saying, like, when was the last time that you just had like a day where you're sort of your best self? I mean, that's very rare in these fast-paced environments. Normally, in those kinds of environments, like our style under stress is triggered. We're also interfacing with other people on the team whose styles under stress are being triggered. And so that's when I started my practice and I started combining those two things. It actually all started to make sense for me, like why I was doing what I was doing and how it all fit together. Because the tools and the processes are great, but helping people to sort through their own sort of and becoming aware of themselves and each other is really the pathway to business success in my experience.
Right. Totally. People who are in these positions of really having great impact in their organization and then also beyond, like in their industry by leading that company, when you can help them better understand the way that they show up, like having awareness around, like, hey, when you're stressed, this is what that looks like for other people. This is what they're noticing. And this is how it impacts them. This is how they respond to you. Right. But people can start to really understand that trickle down, especially when you're a founder, CEO, or near the top. I find that can really be an awakening moment in order for them to try to do it differently. But that self-awareness piece is key. Like without that, there's not really an incentive or motivation to change, make it different.
Right. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. It's been really interesting. I've had a different path than you, but similar stops along the way, just in a different order, I guess. And watching I feel in my career, I've really seen it become much more acceptable and even almost favorable to talk about receiving coaching or creating this level of self-awareness. And what we used to call soft skills, I think is really evolving in the business space. And I've seen CEOs be like really excited about doing this work and bringing on these types of culture change initiatives or coaching driven initiatives. What has that been like for you?
I agree. I think years ago, there was, I don't want to say a stigma necessarily to getting this kind of help, but it was done a little bit more in secret. I think founders may have felt that it was a weakness to seek out this kind of help as opposed to a competitive strength. And I think if we even think about and I watch a lot of professional tennis and anyone who is at the top of their game, whether it's a sport or some other endeavor where the focus is so much on you and creating the results from you. Every one of those people has a coach or multiple coaches,
Right.
for various things. And so I think as we see those people, like I think about like Novak Djokovic, he probably has a team of like 7 coaches around him, all for different aspects of what he's trying to fine tune, whether it's his inner game or other physical things. And so the more that we see those people being kind of open and talking about those things, I think it normalizes it for everybody else, like it's not a weakness, it's actually a competitive advantage if you look at this and you invest in this. So I see a lot more people being much more comfortable and feeling like, oh, this is really something I need. In fact, you and I both have coaches, right?
Right.
Like it's for that same reason. We're running businesses
Yeah.
and we need that support. We want that edge that we can get by making that investment too. So I think it's really cool the way that it's come around as it has. Yeah.
Mhm. Awesome. And what has your experience been in, let's say, just pick a company in particular? And what have you noticed, like when people bring you in, like how is it received maybe at different levels of the organization? And how do you work with that as a starting point? I think a lot of people ask me, like, well, how do you how do you find people to work with? And like what are they struggling with that, makes them want you to come in? And then what does that look like? They have like lots of questions about how that actually goes.
Yeah, so normally I start by working with the founder or members of the leadership team. And
Mhm.
so I think with any kind of anything new, any kind of initiative, any sort of change in an organization, it has to be leader led. So if the CEO is doing it, then that sets a tone and an expectation around this is something that we should all be committing to. And then from there, the goals for coaching vary. So if I'm working with a CEO or a founder, often it's around how do I continue to elevate and keep pace with this company's growth and what is being expected of me in this new phase. And there's always another phase. And so it's like as soon as you kind of master one phase, it's like you're on to the next one. So there's this
Right.
continued growth that needs to happen that I would say not only the CEO and founder, but also the leadership team, and because they need to expand. Oftentimes, they need to start expanding into more strategic areas. Depending on what's happening in the team and how quickly they're moving, there's often changes that are made within that leadership team where people need to learn how to communicate with each other. Leaders need to learn how to communicate and get what they need out of the CEO and vice versa. So there's a lot of that I work with.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then sometimes individuals will come to me and also just seek support on navigating those types of professional situations too. But for the most part, the work that I focus on is with CEOs and their leadership teams.
And similarly, I do something just like that as well, where it either comes from like founder, CEO driven, or there's a team member who says, oh, it's going to be really helpful. And they talk about the challenges that they're experiencing. And I think just some common things that we see across the board, right? That people describe a like super high stress, maybe even toxic culture. I think I often see like top down, like leadership style where it's more forceful. It's not developmental. It's not like coaching led. And that can be really problematic when oftentimes like no, founders aren't necessarily taught how to be leaders and they just have great ideas and they're used to just working like mad to get it done. And there are these inflection points of this business growth along the way. So, like, as you were mentioning, how it evolves and changes in these organizations, and it happens so quickly. But what got them to a certain point? What made that founder successful, like in Series A, right, or even just to get any kind of seed money, right? Are the very attributes and challenges that are going to hold them back from being successful in a more developed organization where maybe you're layering in, bringing more experienced leaders in. Well, they don't want to be led that way. They're much more capable and able to be autonomous and not need to be told what to do or be, driven by fear, right? So I've seen challenges pop up there. Have you ever had that type of experience where like maybe they've outgrown that leadership style?
Absolutely. That's why I think, one of the things that we started out by talking about, which is self-awareness,
Mhm.
that is such a critical success factor for founders who want to be on the journey long term. And you and I probably know of situations and have worked with different companies where, at some point they get off the ride, because they're done and they're exhausted and want to be done. But in
Yeah.
other cases, it's just that they don't have the interest or maybe the orientation to adapt the way that they must adapt in order to be the CEO that the company now needs them to be. Yeah, and so I think that it starts with recognize sort of like who you are and what you're bringing to this role and whether or not you're interested in evolving with it.
Great. What a really great point. And, sometimes self-awareness is a key part of that. And then I also think that beyond a willingness to evolve, there's sometimes just true skill gaps where they might not be able to transition the way that they work. Like it might be so much built into their DNA and their foundation of their personality that that could be really challenging. But I think again, like if you're most interested in the success of that company, then we need to be open and into just creating the awareness around, hey, I might not be the right person to lead anymore. I've seen successful transitions from founder to maybe taking a more consultative role or advisor role, like in a specific part of the business, whether if the background is engineering or whatever, like they would sit in that seat. If you want to lead creative direction and maybe a more marketing agency type organization, that there's a seat there. Or I've seen people drop back into sales because that's the part they really loved. I was with a group the other day and they're just all talking about winning. I just love winning. I love like winning the game of business. And it's perfect sales. It's a great role for you. Come sit over here and we'll let you, motivate and inspire and be the person over there. But there's this really great book by Lisa Cohn, and it's from startup to grown up. I think maybe we've spoken before at another time. She also runs a podcast, but she's a coach for startups and founders. And what she talks about is this really important transition that happens, these growth points, inflection points that we're talking about, and that coaching can really solve a lot of the problems that crop up around that time. And whether it's the self-awareness, I think that there's a lot of cross-functional communication and collaboration that needs to start happening around these certain growth phases that maybe people weren't used to, or they might not even have the skill set or the ability to recognize that that's a need. And so she talks about how we can teach people to not well, number one, bring in coaches if that's what the organization needs, but how do we take our leaders and teach them the tool of coaching to make the organization more successful? How do you go about doing that in organizations you support?
It's interesting. I think I look at it slightly differently. I think, one part is if we're looking at a team that is in the process of scaling, and, if we think really back to the beginning days when there's a handful of people, alignment is very, very easy to create at that point because you're working so closely together. And a lot of these people have been there since the very beginning. And so you completely share the same view and mission. And then as more people are added, they don't have that context. They are not as invested in what you're trying to build. They should still be very invested, but it's not exactly the same. And so all these little things start to break down what you were relying on to keep people aligned and focused and moving forward. And so the way that I look at it is coaching is definitely helpful, but I think this is also where you need to start looking at like your routines and process. And by that, it's not like heavy stuff, but it's okay, how am I communicating to my team? And how do I start to do that on a regular basis so that the things that I used to just take for granted that everyone knows, now I have a monthly all hands call, where that first Friday of every month, we're anchoring back to where we're headed and what's shifted around that direction since the last time we got together. And then also, what are the things that I need to make sure people are most focused on right now? So, the first thing that I would say is like setting the foundation of how do we make sure that there are some things that we can use and rely on to keep people focused? And then from there, I think the coaching is super helpful in kind of like the one-to-one and helping people to understand how they specifically connect into their work, and to the extent that they are like, what are they doing that's working really well that they should continue to focus on, and what are the things that they are doing that are not working as well for them that they need to course correct. So I sort of see it as like a combination of approaches to help that team move forward as it's scaling quickly.
Yeah, those are some really excellent points, and thank you for bringing that up, right? that there's things happening all around. And that's why it's so challenging. And we're talking a lot about startups and founders, but I think this is true for any organization. Like it organizations are dynamic and there are so many things happening from like a new strategy or a new market is trying to open up or channel, like, or just there's stuff going on for you personally, but yet you insert yourself into the workspace. And so everyone is having that experience, like for whatever's going on for them. And there's just so many layers, there's so many things happening. And it's important to recognize that if you really want to get your hands around your company culture, make it, focus it on what could be improved upon, what could be more positive here. What kind of behaviors or efforts do we want to reinforce and drive? That just really anything starting with awareness could be so helpful. And that's really what coaching can provide. I just want to thank you for being here today. It's been so great to just hear your perspective on things, your experiences. I know even though we said, hey, we have some similar training and some similar types of work, it's so refreshing, I think, to hear other people's perspectives and see how they approach the work because I know I want to learn something every time I do one of these episodes or anytime I partner with someone in this work. So thanks for being here.
No, it's my pleasure, and it's been so fun to just have these conversations with you because, yeah, I agree. Like we have similar experiences, but we also have very different strengths. And so I love watching you do what you do because I'm learning and picking up on things, and hopefully, I'm returning that favor. So thanks for
Well,
having me today.
right. And how can people find out more about you if they want to get in touch?
They can find me on LinkedIn at Elizabeth O'Neill, and they can also find me on my website, elizabethoniel.com, and follow my newsletter, subscribe to my newsletter, which they can find on my website as well.
Yes. If you guys are interested in the topics at all that we're discussing, Elizabeth is a great person to follow. I know at least on LinkedIn, like you have a lot of great posts about our topics today and tips that are very actionable for founders and executives to follow. So I will make sure all that information is spelled out in the show notes. So wherever you're seeing this, make sure to just look at the description section and those links should be there for you to get in touch. Thanks again to you guys for listening because without our audience here, it would just be Elizabeth and I having our coffee and tea together, which wouldn't be so bad, but it is so nice to share our insights with the world. And I hope that you guys definitely learned a thing or two. Thanks again for being here and see you soon. Thanks for joining us this week on Eye Openers. Make sure to visit brittanydraws.com/podcast for this week's show notes. And if you found value in today's episode, I would so appreciate you giving us a rating on Apple Podcasts or share it with a friend. Also, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. This all helps to support the show.